In today's episode, we talk with Jessica Due, who is most recently one of the members on the executive leadership team for one of the largest animal sanctuaries in the United States. In this conversation, we talk about animal care, food systems, and how this relates to social justice. So I invite you to listen to this conversation with an open heart and an open mind. And let's get started.
Everybody's learning, everybody's growing, everybody's got to start somewhere. How the wise one grows, how the wise one grows.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to How the Wise One Grows. Today we have a very special episode, but before we get started, we're going to land here together, as we always do, with 3 deep breaths. So wherever you are, find a space that feels safe for you. And if it's safe, you can gently rest your eyes. If you're driving, please do not. And just soften your gaze at a point in front of you. And notice where your body meets the earth. And allow your shoulders to soften down your back. Take a big breath in and a big breath out. Inhale, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it out. One more inhale. And exhale. And you can slowly return to this space. So we are having an exciting conversation today with Jessica Due. Jessica brings over a decade of expertise and experience providing specialized care to rescued and rehabilitated farm animals at sanctuaries across the country, partnering with UCLA, UC Davis, and Cornell University. Most recently, as a member of the executive leadership team for one of the largest sanctuaries in the United States, Jessica led national animal care, rescue, and placement. For the past decade, Jessica has implemented sanctuary best practices, standard operating procedures, strategic planning, programmatic alignment, and integration while partnering with and supporting multiple other sanctuaries across the country. Jessica began her career in animal care and rescue at a national sanctuary before co-founding her own care farm and has served as a keynote speaker at conferences and has been featured on podcasts, fundraising galas, and by media outlets including the LA Times, Animal Planet, and NPR. Her work includes contributions to legislative advocacy and policy reform. Through her advocacy, Jessica believes in addressing interrelated issues of oppression and approaches her work through a social justice lens, centering diversity, equity, and inclusion within the animal protection movement and raising systemic issues of access to food and land. Jessica supports her farm worker rights and centering BIPOC perspectives and voices. Wow. Thank you so much for being here today, Jessica.
Oh, thank you, Holly, for having me on your podcast and for the introduction. I'm thankful to be here and share space with you and be in conversation with you today.
I'm so excited too. Well, Jessica and I met when I was visiting my brother and his girlfriend in LA, and I got to go visit this amazing farm sanctuary that Jessica was working on. And she really opened my eyes in a way that has to issues around food and animal care that has really impacted my day-to-day life in ways that I'm engaging with food in my day-to-day. So I was wondering if you would mind sharing when you first became interested in animal care and rescue.
Yes, it's a great question, and I love to share this story. I wanted to take a moment before I started and say, my name is Jessica Due, and I go by her, they pronouns, and I'm speaking today from the native sovereign nation land of the Fernandino Tatavian tribe. So I wanted to take a second and honor
Thank
that.
you so much for naming that.
Um, so I first became interested in animals and the multi-species community at a very early age. I was raised vegetarian and naked in the mountains
I love
of
that.
Northern California. Yes. So my upbringing was one that I knew we were all linked from the soil and the trees, to the wildlife and one another, to the clothes we wore, the food we ate, and that we were all part of this like larger ecosystem. And even at a young age, I always found it so wild how disconnected people were to their communities and the food they ate and the land they resided on. And so I began my advocacy work as a kid, at a very young age because of that knowledge. And before the internet, I know I'm dating myself there, Holly, but before the internet, I would go to the local library and get addresses for politicians all across the world. And I would write to them and plead for them to end whale and dolphin slaughter. And when I moved to Southern California, I was looking for a job, and I remember talking to my partner and I was like, I don't want to get into the corporate world. And I don't want to be in the industry because it seemed like everyone in LA is in the industry. And I really wanted to go back to those roots my childhood roots. And I found a job at a sanctuary for farmed animals that was close by. And Holly, I remember going into the sanctuary, and I was talking to my new colleagues, and they asked me how long I had been vegan, and I was horrified, and I was wondering where I had taken the wrong turn. And, I explained that I had been vegetarian my entire life, and I, hadn't eaten animals because, and I felt veganism or vegetarianism was what saved animals. I thought veganism was like extreme, and I didn't understand it. And I felt like I could never give up cheese, and why should I?
A common fear, giving up cheese.
1000%. It's something I hear all the time. And I probably like on my face, I know I didn't say the last part of like veganism is a little bit extreme, but I'm sure my face showed that to my new colleagues. And my colleagues asked me, so where did I think milk came from? And I remember the way they asked that question, it made me question like everything I thought I knew. And I was slightly like hesitant in giving a very like an answer that I knew, like, well, dairy cows that produce milk, I've seen the commercials, happy cows come from California. Um, and they said, how do you think or how do humans produce milk? And I was like, oh, well, you have to be, pregnant or impregnated. And they let air take up the space, and my mind was like connecting all the dots. And I just looked at them and I was like, I have so many questions. like as the light bulbs were like going, connecting it. And the colleagues said, you know what, why don't you go home tonight, watch a 3-minute behind the scene undercover video about the dairy industry, and if you care to, I'd love to hear how you feel about it tomorrow. And I went home and I got about 30 seconds into that video, and I was horrified.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had no idea about the horrors of the dairy industry. And so once I knew, I really couldn't go back. It's been a decade now, over a decade since that moment. And that conversation really helped me shift my gears towards that like food system transformation through animal care and rescue in the sanctuary community. I was realizing at that time, and as all those light bulbs were going off, is, you know, it's simple to cast blame. I had
Mm-hmm.
previously done on other countries and cultures that for eating, animals, whales and dolphins, or feeling outrage over a lion being killed, and not realizing that I had been part of the same oppressive systems, like right here at home.
Mm.
And the animals deemed worthy through human supremacy standards were just different.
Mm.
And that really began my shift into veganism and food system transformation and animal care. Yeah, sorry, that's a long answer to how do you, feel about, or how did you find yourself in animal care? But
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that story with us. And especially I think I had this moment when I was on the farm with you and we were talking about dairy. And I was like, I connected those dots for the first time. And I'm sure a lot of people listening right now are like, what? That's
Mhm.
how it's something we don't think about because we're so disconnected from the systems and the process. Um,
Mhm.
but I have so many questions. So, do you mind sharing just first of all, like what is animal care and what is the animal protection movement?
Mm, mm. Yes, I mean, so there are human animals and non-human animals that I think of when you ask that
Mm.
question. Caregiving is a part of my soul. I've been a caregiver for almost 2 decades. I first started in human animals, and then moving to non-human animals over the last decade. And I've seen firsthand the struggles of working in that care field. When I first started in the non-human animal care field with animals that we farm, Holly, there was no formal training. There was no like protocol, schedule, information guides, behavioral training, emergency plans, and the hands-on training was so heavily focused on the medical side of caregiving. And it was
Mm.
really like emergency-based care. I was essentially like thrown into a caregiving shift. And as most are, you're running from one barn to the next, and you're feeding out, you're giving medications, you're doing wound care, you're briefly looking around to see if there's like anything out of the ordinary or anything that stands out, and then you're moving on to the next barn.
Mm.
um I found in the animal care movement is it's easy to get into the do it now and ask later kind of framework,
Uh-huh.
especially when you're overwhelmed with new information, when you're looking at your leaders and everyone, and they're saying, well, this is how we've always done it. You often put your head down and you're like, okay, well, if I knew more, I wouldn't question this, or I just don't understand yet, and I will one day. And so you
Mm-hmm.
kind of bury that, and you go about it, and you just for me, I was like, I just need to educate myself and then I can ask later. And um, it was about a year into caregiving that I started to ask why. And why are we creating these day-to-day to-do lists that didn't allow anyone to thrive um, in that current measurement of success? It, you know, we weren't having time to learn. We weren't having time to get to know the residents. We weren't able to ask what quality of life was and why, and what, like, even take a moment and think the residents that reside at Sanctuary, like, what did they want? And how did they think life was to thrive? What was life for them to thrive? They didn't ask to be here. Even though it's a sanctuary, they didn't ask to be here. And so, thinking through that, and how do you create agency for somebody that didn't ask to be there? So I started questioning this, and then I was wondering, why are we scared to ask why in the beginning? And so I began really examining and truly asking these questions of what it meant to be in a multi-species community. And I started asking other sanctuary workers. I was asking my fellow caregivers. I was asking other people in the animal rights protection movement of what they considered a measurement of success, and how did they approach their work. And I and how do you move from a scarcity mindset of that, like go, 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 and like barely getting by, heavy burnout, turnover, to like an abundance approach, an abundance mindset? And because everyone's trying their best, most often in the sanctuary community, it's with little to no resources. It's one person doing the care of, upwards to 100 animals. There was paid, disparaging between caregivers and other staff members. And I kept questioning and wondering what this was. And as soon as I moved into a leadership role, I used all of that data I had collected over the years, and I was able to create an umbrella framework of animal care. So that really represented that holistic approach to an abundance mindset, and changing even titles of what was typically called like the cleaning and grounds and facility. That was, their titles. And I'm like, but you're doing care. You're providing care. You're providing an environment. You're part of the overall care practice. You're caregivers. And looking at the heavy medical side of caregiving, and I was like, but you're wellness caregivers. You're looking at how to enrich these lives. You're not looking at only medical, right? You're looking at how to really create a life that embodies sanctuary, embodies a thriving environment. And by reimagining what care was and what the measurement of success was, then you start having learning opportunities for your teams, and you have professional growth opportunities, and you see them starting to thrive themselves and be supported and feel valued for the work they're doing. And so when you ask me what care means to me, it's so deep. It's rooted in who I am and how I approach my day-to-day, and I approach my career and my passion and my calling for caregiving in the sanctuary community. And my goals and care is what I've, to move from surviving to thriving to flourishing. And that all comes from that care perspective, and how we each should feel each day. We care for ourselves, we care for the loved ones around us. And so really just embodying that care.
Yeah, it sounds like a very holistic approach to care. And a lot of what I'm hearing, I think, is unfortunately pretty foreign to most people, but it's really seeing these animal beings as equals and having like a reciprocal relationship with them versus just one of taking and taking. My dog is having a lot of fun barking outside the window. She's like, "You're talking about animals?"
Yeah, me?
Me? I hear your voice.
I love that.
But yeah, one where it's not just taking, and it's honoring and trying to understand this other being that might speak in another language that we don't quite understand, based off of what we've been learned and trained to see things as. So I really like that it's that more holistic approach to approaching care and seeing these other beings as life, just as we are life.
Yeah. I mean, we're so disconnected in this world, right? Like right now, like with all the technology, with all of, even during COVID, isolation, and, even just into the food system and that whole approach, we're all so disconnected from one another. And it's so important to take a moment and breathe, like we started this podcast today with breathing, grounding, and seeing how you can, your next step is embodying that care that you want for yourself, but then how can you share that to the community around you?
Yes. So for those who are more foreign to these things, can you break down what a sanctuary is? Like, what is a farm sanctuary? This was new to me.
Okay. Yeah. I think sanctuary could be a physical space. I also think it could be, theoretically, like a space of like my grandma's sanctuary to me, like sanctuaries when it comes to animals we farm are, they're everywhere right now. You can find in your local community a sanctuary, most likely for either a farm animal or domestic animals like dogs and cats. A sanctuary is providing refuge for animals that have escaped either from self-liberation or been rescued out of the animal agriculture industry. So in where they have safety, they have the ability to live long, healthy lives. They have enrichment. They have the foods they need to really ensure the wellness and the well-being of who they are as individuals, not because of what we want to consume from them, right? Not as a product, but as an individual. At Sanctuary, they're given a name where historically they've had a tag maybe, or a band or a brand. In the masses, they're given individualized care and that identity, and promise, of not being vulnerable to harm again. I think that's a tricky one, because when I think of caregiving, and I'm sorry if I digress and go everywhere with what I'm talking about, but something I've thought a lot about is when you're a resident at a sanctuary, and you're free from the animal agriculture industry, your day-to-day is whatever you want it to be, right? You can either spend it in the ponds taking naps, you can be exploring on the hills, you can be playing on play structures, you can seeking out your caregivers for love and affection. It's you have that agency. When it comes to care, there's certain things that as caregivers and as our obligation for them as they reside at sanctuary, is to provide care, right? Like, do they have their vaccines? Are their hoofs trimmed? Are they did they have an infection when they came in? Did they get their antibiotics? Are they on routine monitors? And how do you provide that while also providing agency at sanctuary? So if you're here, and we know we have to do this because it's like we can't be neglectful, right? Like they need this care, but how do you then encourage them the agency within sanctuary to be able to desire to get your hoof trimmed, to have like it be fear-free, to be stress, if you've ever heard a pig get their hoof like trimmed, it sounds, it can sound really like loud and a little shocking if you haven't heard it before, and you're like, you're getting a pedicure. So I'm digressing of like what that sanctuary means because it's complicated.
Yeah.
A safe haven is, you know, a sanctuary. It's you in a closet reading a book and you're feeling safe.
Mm-hmm.
You're free from harm and judgment and oppression. When I think of sanctuary, think of music, listening to ears, and you're, you know, in a different world. I think sanctuary is different for every single person.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that a lot. And it sounds a lot, again, like honoring those beings that are in that space and tuning into the whole soul that's there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, how, and this is, I'm sure you know tons on this, but many listening might be totally new to this. So, how does animal care relate to food systems, and how can that relate to social justice?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's another really great question, Holly. You know, our food system is the premise of, you know, or our food systems, yeah, premise on human supremacy, really, over our fellow animals and the quote unquote natural world. Um,
Yeah,
it's
can you
deep.
talk about human supremacy? I've never heard that term before, but it sounds important.
Yeah. So human supremacy is as humans, we feel um, entitled to the natural world, right? We can dictate, we have the power to dictate what the animals' lives are. We dictate, depending on where you live, what animals are worthy of a life of freedom or being considered a domestic animal like a dog and cat and get to live with you and, you know, beloved part of the family to who is then killed for your meal.
Mm-hmm.
It's through that the human perspective over our fellow animals, often over our fellow human beings, even.
It could be related to the natural environment too and the planet.
1000%. Yeah. So it's through that lens instead of
Got it.
looking at it as we're part of this ecosystem. We're part of the
Part
natural
of a
world.
whole.
Yeah. We're removed and even elevated in
Got it.
that.
Thank you for breaking that part down.
Yeah, of course, you know, and all of that has deep roots in colonization, white supremacy, racial injustice, enslavement, and the genocide and erasure of, you know, and displacement of indigenous peoples. So when you sit down, typically, right, if you go to grab a meal and or sit down with a friend for a meal. Rarely, as when we're eating and when we're sharing meal, do we think of how that meal was possible even. That's not taken into account. We don't think of the million plus um, people that work in the fields, in processing plants, in factory farms, in slaughterhouses. So, and then the system's designed that way. It's designed to be hidden so that the dangerous work that they do is hidden from public eye. Um, when you look at areas that these facilities have been placed, you will often find low income communities of color. Their homes and their communities are often riddled with the effects of animal agriculture industry, and from like water waste runoff to you know, health issues to oppressive and abusive work environments, such as like long hours and high risk to injury, and minimal pay. So this targeting of people of color is called environmental racism. And a large percentage of the workers are, low income people of color, many undocumented, who have few options of jobs and to be able to provide for their families. And injuries are so common on on these hazardous jobs. Workers often suffer incidences from even amputation to because of like the severe like speed of like the processing lines. I don't know if you know that this, Holly, but OSHA released a report, and the data said that there are about 2 amputations every month
Wow.
in meat package, like meat
Wow.
processing. And then there are like many more severe injuries that result in hospitalization. But because many of like the people that are working in this situation are um, migrants and undocumented workers, they're threatened for deportation if they report any of the like mistreatment or the condition or the injuries. So it's it's when we can provide care to ourselves and our community, the lands and the animals, and by choosing a diet free of animal products, since the food system is built around these industrialized like agricultural like practices, what we eat contributes to these cruel practices, right? These unjust systems. And so if you like personally, I'm a vegan. I try to eat local produce as much as possible, local organic produce. I attempt to grow a lot of my own food using permaculture techniques. And if you have like a CSA, like which is a community sponsored agriculture, I would suggest it. You can farmers markets, and I highly recommend organic because it reduces the amount of chemicals that you're ingesting, but also that the workers are
Mm.
subjected to. And yeah, I think everyone can make a difference with this. No act is too small. Literally every act that you do can fight these systems of oppression by how you approach even the meals you're eating, and acknowledging all of that history. Like, how did that meal get to your plate?
Yeah.
You
Well, I think
know?
really appreciate you naming that, because I think typically when the average person thinks about a meal or being a vegan or a vegetarian, they think, oh, about animal rights. But
Mm-hmm.
it's so linked to human rights on a
Mm-hmm.
very deep level that we are so detached from not only, where these things are coming from and the huge implications they have on the environment as well, but also the people that are part of these processes. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, like after visiting the farm with you, I've made pretty significant changes to my day-to-day diet. And even my husband, he's not as like taken the full leap as I
Yeah.
am, a bigger leap, but
Mm-hmm.
he, has now like, he's like, yeah, I don't want to use milk in my coffee. So now he's using like the oat milk creamer. And like, he's
Mm-hmm.
like, I feel less bloated. This is actually really great. Like,
Right.
even if it's like one small thing you can do, that is an impact. And where you put your dollars matters. Like, the more you're putting dollars into these alternatives and into these
Mm-hmm.
local systems to get food, the more those things can flourish and grow, and the market will listen to where the dollars go.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many great alternatives out there.
There are.
Like so many. The oat milk that you just mentioned, great. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. When I first became vegan, it was much different world than it is now.
Yeah. I've always
Yeah.
been dairy intolerant, lactose
Mm-hmm,
intolerant.
mm-hmm.
That's the word.
Yeah.
And I remember the stuff I had to drink as a kid. I was just like,
Mm-hmm,
I just don't need anything to be a
mm-hmm.
milk. I'll just have water.
Yeah, right.
But now it's like all about it. Coconut milk.
Yeah, uh-huh. Well, even what you said, like, oh, I'm lactose intolerant. Well, no, you're not a baby cow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this milk was not meant for you in the first place, you know? This
Mm-hmm.
was meant for a calf that needed to grow very quickly because it's a big animal, you know, so it's heavy and like calorie. It's not healthy for us. I remember I've been an athlete growing up, and there's always those commercials, you know, your favorite like athlete would have the milk mustache,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Do you remember those
Oh yeah,
commercials?
the
Like
got milk.
the got milk. And you know, I believe that so thoroughly, you know, like why would they lie? why would why would anyone lie to us, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Oh, money, I
Mm-hmm.
forgot.
That's a
Money,
thing.
that's a thing. Yeah, but there's so many different alternatives out there, and you really do make those choices. um because again, like, yeah, every act you do is can be a form of advocacy and activism.
Mm-hmm. So,
Mm.
can you share a rescue story that impacted you
Mm.
in your life? I
I
want to
can
talk about
share.
the animals.
Okay, yeah, I can share a couple if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. I okay, I'd love to share June B and Susan if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so because you know, there's not many, Holly, that like rescue stories that haven't impacted me. You know,
Mm.
I've been doing rescue for a long time, and been fortunate to even lead a lot of the national rescue efforts at the previous sanctuary that I worked with. And I still can think of each one, even though it's been over a decade. So, but when I think of June B and Susan and their story, it resonates to what we were speaking to, like community as well. So I don't know if you remember this. It made national news, but there was the news channels and all the coverage, about 40 cows that had escaped a slaughterhouse and were running on the streets of LA.
Oh my gosh.
Did you hear about that at all, or?
I think I did when I visited the farm, but I don't think
Okay.
I had before.
Yeah. Um, so if you close your eyes, you can vision that, like, right? 40 cows running in the streets of LA. It's quite the scene.
Oh yeah.
It's quite the scene. And so I remember getting the call, and that was the information we got. 40 cows had escaped the slaughterhouse, were running on the streets of LA, and they were being recaptured. And the community at large, vegans, non-vegans, the community showed up and were like, you have to save them. They just liberated themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They saw an opportunity to run, and they took it. And the community showed up for them. And you know, there was calls to the slaughterhouse, there was news everywhere, there was celebrities speaking out and begging for their lives to be saved. And sanctuaries, you know, not just the sanctuary I'd worked for, but like sanctuaries at large were coming forward and saying, I could take some, I could, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we can help support bringing them to sanctuary. And they captured 38 within the first 24 hours. And we got news that they had all been killed.
Oh.
It was devastating, I mean, to say the least, for them. Imagine that, right? You self-liberate, you're running, and the feelings of being with others, running for freedom, to be captured and killed, like, it's your worst nightmare. It's out of a horror movie, really. It's like, and I remember bawling. I remember just absolutely bawling and feeling like, oh, I wish we could have done more. I wish we could have saved, like, it was devastating. And the next day we got a call And they had found another. She had evaded everyone. And because of the outpour the day before and the celebrity and the sanctuary community and everyone speaking out, they decided to release her to us. And we went and got her. They had us come in the middle of the night, so there was no other cows there. We came and got June Be Free, named by Diane Warren, and brought her to sanctuary. She was exhausted and tired, and she was terrified. She was absolutely terrified. She didn't know where she was going, right? And so we took a hands-off approach. We're like, here's food and water, here's everything you need, relax, calm down, get used to your settings, and we don't need anything from you. We don't need, like, you're here, you get to be you, and that's it. And we knew there was one more because they had said 40, and they had got 38, and so but we didn't want to be like, name that to the slaughterhouse either.
Yeah.
We're just like internally like, okay, are we ready? Like truck trailer loaded in case we get the call. Like if she's spotted, we can go. And so it was about a week later, and we got the call, and I remember grabbing one of my coworkers and colleagues, and I said, let's go get her. And they were going to release her to us. And so we're like, we saved 2. We have to just sit with that. We just have to, like, 2 lives is better than not, like, just like all of those conversations. And when we got to the slaughterhouse, it was during the day, and there was hundreds of other cows. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to a slaughterhouse, and I don't recommend it. But I have quite a bit, and I think this time was one of the most traumatizing times. We got there, and the smell, you can feel the fear in the air, like it's like palatable, like you can feel the fear and that energy, and you just have to, like, take a deep breath. I know from this rescue work, you really have to be like, I'm saving this person. Like, I'm not getting into a fight with them. I'm not gonna do anything to hurt the chances of not saving them.
Yeah.
And we saw Susan, and she had now been out for a week, no water, injuries all over her body, exhausted. I mean, absolutely exhausted. She's back at the slaughterhouse. So she had pure terror on her face. Everyone responds differently to fear. Some people run, some people fight, some people try to hide, typically it's a flight response from prey animals. And Susan wasn't having it. She turned, and even her pure exhaustion, she was ready to fight for her life. She was ready to continue to fight for her life. And I look over as they're leading cows past us to slaughter. They're leading them right by her. And I'm like, this poor being, how much has she survived already? And to see this, to be in this space, like, she must be absolutely terrified. So it took a long time to get her on the trailer. And I remember as soon as we pulled away from the slaughterhouse, I held my colleague's hand, and we just both started crying silently, because number one, that scene, that the emotions, the energy from that doesn't leave you. You have to work through that in one way or another. But we were terrified for her. She still didn't know where she was going. We're like, you're safe, you're safe, you're safe. Like, I hope you know that. Like, but how could we convey that to her? She's on a trailer. We're in the shop.
She's horrified still.
She's horrified.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until we were pulling up to sanctuary and pulling into where June was already there and been there, for a handful of days at that point, when we started to breathe. We're like, have we been collectively holding our breath for this, drive? We pulled in, and I remember like unlocking the back of the trailer and opening it up to June's area, and Susan running off and turning around immediately like, okay, all right, okay, and turned back around. And June came running down, like mooing at her,
Oh.
and immediately took over the role of protector. And we were, talking, like watching them and their interaction. And Susan, like June brought her over to the food and water, and Susan laid down probably for the first time in how long, and relaxed for a little bit, and June stood guard.
Wow.
And that was for a few weeks. We were just like, you all bond, relax, calm, and then you slowly started seeing that fear, that pure terror leave their face. Day by day, they were less cautious. They were less fearful when we entered to clean or provide more food or, do the waters. They wouldn't stomp and like turn to you. They would even like kind of turn their backs, and we're like, oh, okay, they're calm. And then we'd see them sitting and chewing cud together, and we're like, oh, all is well. Like all is gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. And then they finally met the rest of the herd, and watching that bonding moment is just something that will stick with you forever, to this day, where they have the agency. If they want to come down for public tours, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. They can go do the acres in the back and enjoy life and not engage with people ever if they do. But they came down. Like the first time they had the opportunity, they came down and they stood back, but they were like watching everyone and watching humans interact with, like, the other steers, and getting kissed on and loved on, and they're probably going like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like a whole different life. So now where they'll accept, pets and scratches, and the fear's all gone. And I think for me, why that rescue story stands out so much and has imprinted, on me, is these beings first, like, to endure everything they endured before even getting to that slaughterhouse, right? These girls have multiple brands, so had been moved and transported and had that fear probably repeatedly over their years. To then seeing an opportunity to save yourself and taking it and running, I'm like, yes, you go, like that's beautiful. And to see how the community spoke out. And these are people, Holly, that were like, save them. I'm sure they were still eating a hamburger.
Yeah.
They were still probably disconnected completely to that, but they were rooting for them. They were showing up and calling. And I just think there's so much power when it comes to community. There's so much beauty in community, and seeing how the community showed up for them, to fight for them as hard as they were fighting for themselves, was something to be beautiful, or like it imprinted on me to be a part of, and then watching the healing and all of that. So,
and it shows how that community can make a difference too. Like, because those two, Susan and June B, were able to be set free because of that outpouring of community. That did make a difference in those two lives. And, however small it might seem, it's a huge thing that can continue to ripple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think they were most likely dairy cows, or
no? They were.
Okay.
For me.
And they had just been moved around a number of times.
Right. So you go, like, typically, and it's different, but they'll start at one facility, and they'll go to like a feedlot so they get fattened up. If they're like used to breed, they'll go to a breeding facility. So, and then eventually, typically, like for dairy cows at like 5 years old, they'll be sent to slaughter after they've produced, a handful of babies, and then their bodies are spent. I mean, these are animals that can live up towards of 20 years old, but, yeah. So most likely, because they're Angus, cattle. They were raised for the meat consumption.
I remember seeing the cows at the farm. They were just the largest animals I have ever
Mhm.
seen in my life. Like, no cow I have
Mhm.
ever seen, because they were from, I think these ones that we saw, I can't remember their names,
Mhm.
but came
Mhm.
from a slaughterhouse. And
Mhm.
you could really see the difference in what we're doing to these animals. Because they're just, it doesn't seem as if they're like living naturally, and how their body would have evolved and developed as it would have needed to best support them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because they're not supposed to live past slaughter age. So what we've done is modified them genetically and through selective breeding to get very large very quickly. Cornish birds that are the birds that are typically used for meat. You have the layer hens that are used for eggs. That's typically like red stars, leghorns. You'll have Cornish crosses or Cornish that are used for meat birds, and they're still peeping when they go to slaughter. Sometimes it's difficult to see if they're male or female. They're so young, but they're at 5 pounds already.
Wow.
Because of that genetic modification and that breeding that we've done. So
Wow.
yeah, you're right. I mean, Holstein steer, I think you're talking about as well.
Yeah.
They could be 6 feet tall, huge, and 3,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And people are like, I've never seen a cow that big. And I'm like, because you wouldn't.
Yeah,
Like,
because it's not normal.
it's not normal. Yeah. And for them to live, a life that they can. So,
hmm
mhm.
Thank you for sharing light on that, because I think that's something a lot of people don't know either.
Mhm.
So I know we're getting a little short on time, um, but I guess, what do you think? It's going to take me a second to think about how to accurately word this,
Mhm.
because there's so much there. But I guess we've covered this a lot, is why the way we eat matters, because it
Mhm.
is a direct relationship with the living beings around us, the environment, the humans, the animals, the plants. Um, how can we start to reframe our relationship with animals and the food system?
Mhm. Um, I have a short answer since we're on short
Yeah.
time too. And I really, Holly, I believe that we can reframe our relationship with animals and the food system by working to understand and challenge these historical systems and these underlying logics like motivating the harm, right, of our food system. So when we divest ourselves and our communities from the mechanisms that perpetuate these harms, um, and we can articulate and practice and actualize new possibilities, that can promote and can promote collective um, thriving of humans, the fellow animals, and the planet, we can counter the harms of the current food system and truly reframe our relationship with animals and the larger ecosystem at Earth. So educate yourselves, think through, question everything. Um, and the more you question, the more you're pushing back on these systems that seem so normal, and the more you're going to understand, right? The more you're going to go, oh, every single thing I'm doing contributes either in a positive or a negative light.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that you name that questioning. And I notice it within myself. And I think I think this can be a heated conversation among people. And I
Mhm.
often think it's because when we think about it and we learn about how much harm is happening in these spaces, we feel guilty. We feel uncomfortable. We feel like we've done something wrong, but we didn't know we were doing it wrong. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, one, like, discomfort is okay. We can be with it. Two, these are a part of like these far bigger systems that, you know, like we grew up seeing the Got Milk ads thinking like positive association, and we're never shown the other side of things. So it's not your fault that you didn't know, but now that you feel this discomfort, what can you do about it? Are you do you want to just keep pretending you didn't know, nothing's wrong? Or once you do know, how can you adjust? And I think like, at least noting, like for me, if I tell myself, all right, from now on, I'm going to be completely vegan from here on out, that feels maybe more intimidating and less accessible. But if I think to myself, okay, I'm going to try this week not having dairy and see how that goes. Maybe making it like more baby steps and making smaller choices, maybe investing in your local CSA instead of that extra trip to the grocery store. Those small things that you can do every day make a big impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, adopting a plant-based diet doesn't make you perfect.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't. And it's just about reducing harm as much as you possibly can. That's it. And everything you do. That's how I believe. It's what I believe in my soul. If you can reduce that, reduce the waste, embody care to your community, to yourself and the animals, and look at yourself as part of the ecosystem. It's huge, you know, but it's not about being perfect. Who wants to be perfect? That's boring.
We can't be.
What is perfect, you know? So I think it's different for every single person, you know, what those steps are going to be.
Yeah. And I really like that you bring it back to care here, you know, taking care of yourself, taking care of your animal friends, taking care of your plant friends, and this whole system that we are a part of.
Yeah, it's so important.
Yeah. So before we go, do you mind sharing how we can continue to support you and your work and the tremendous things you're advocating for in the world?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on today and for sharing your space with me first. You know, I really appreciated the conversation, and I know some of the stuff we're talking about can be heavy, and so I appreciate that's honoring that space for me to come on and speak with you all and be in community. I am right now, I would love for you all to stay tuned, because in the coming weeks, there will be more information about an exciting new project that I'm co-founding.
Yay.
And yeah, I'm really excited. It's, you know, it speaks to everything we are talking about today. And then people can follow me on Instagram at Jess_Due, and that's JESS_DUE. You can also follow the Doom Ranch on Instagram, which is my personal permaculture ranch in the high desert of California.
Love that.
And that's THE_DUEM and _RANCH. Reach out. I would love to hear from people.
And I'll put all this in the show notes too. And if we have updates on your project by that point, I'll be sure that people can find those in the show notes too.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, it's I just launched the Doom Ranch Instagram, and it was a little bit nerve-wracking to put yourself out there, you know. And but I'm excited to share the progress of it. And thank you so much for holding space for me, Holly.
Thank you so much for being a part of it. I appreciate you, and I really appreciate this conversation.
Absolutely. Much love to all of your listeners. And yeah, again, please reach out. I would love to hear from you all.
Awesome. Thank you for taking time to listen to the wise one inside of you today. please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast to help it grow. Until the next time, let's keep taking it one breath at a time.